All right, so we've been talking about starchy crops and we've been talking about plants that store starch in their stems. And now we're going to look at plants that store starch in their roots. Typically, roots are used for absorbing water and minerals and transporting them to the stems, but they can also store starch. Usually with some type of modification, moving away from more of a fibrous root system to one that's more of a tap root system. This also allows for ease of asexual propagation. And some of the crops that we're going to talk about are ones you're probably familiar with, like carrots or turnips or beets. But then there will be some others that will probably be new to you. For example, do you know about burdock or celeriac or daikon or even jicama? So let's get started. So jicama is a plant that actually has two edible parts. The first part is the pod that can be consumed immature, kind of like a green bean, and it's called a yam bean, and it has in it, well, throughout the plant, this sugar that is called inulin, which is thought to be a prebiotic, which the inulin ferments using bacteria in your colon. So it's important for gut health. And it's originated out of Latin America with several species originating there. And they made their way also cultivated in Southeast Asian countries. Now, the plant has a vining growth habit and is propagated vegetatively or asexually and is a staple food crop in parts of Africa that are dry. Now, the pods themselves, like I said, can be eaten immature, but the seeds actually, once they mature, produce a compound that is anti-herbivory, which produces a compound called rotenone that can be used as an insecticide or a pesticide. Now, oftentimes the jicama is the underground root portion, and that is often eaten fresh or raw as long as the peel is removed because the peel has compounds that are anti-herbivory and can be toxic. So you have to at least peel it before you eat it. And we'll find that that's true in other root crops that are starchy. They typically have compounds in their skin that make them um, bitter or toxic. Now, if we move on to sweet potato, this is a true root, and it's from this genera Ipomea. It was domesticated in Peru, and made its way through Central and South America and parts of the Caribbean. The Arawak people group called it batata, like potato, and they do have a similar point of origin like white potato, but they are not related in any way, and in fact, are sweeter and have color pigmentation in their root. They were brought to Europe by Christopher Columbus, introduced them to Spain, and actually then made their way back to the United States and were planted in the first colony in Virginia. While they're roots, they do produce stems off of their roots and can be propagated similarly to a potato. And so this is something that we do today is propagating via cutting, stem cutting. This plant is well adapted to warm growing climates, though we can grow it here in Indiana. There are some varieties that will produce starchy root in our shortened growing season. Sweet potato is also an important food staple for animal feed and is popular in Africa and China. China is one of the main producers of sweet potato, although it's grown here in the Southeast in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. Um, but it could actually be grown as far north as New Hampshire. Sometimes sweet potato is colloquially called yam, but they are very different plant species and are not related at all. George Washington Carver was most notable for his work with soy, as well as peanuts as a way to help rotate away from cotton. And so he also promoted sweet potato. And sweet potato can also be used for its flour and starch. There's latex that's produced inside the sweet potato that can be extracted. And it also contains plant pigments that can be used for dye. Now, the plant itself produces roots that are high in carbohydrates, higher than, say, the typical white potato, but they also have more nutrition in them because of their uh, colors that are high in provitamin A. Hey, if you want to get provitamin A and you want to avoid broccoli, you can just eat a sweet potato more than eating 23 cups of broccoli. Now, like I said, sweet potato and white yam look similar, but they are not related at all. They belong to the genera Dioscorea. They are a root crop that is a staple food crop in West Africa, parts of Asia, Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean. And they've been cultivated for a long time in tropical Africa. You typically wouldn't see white yam here in the United States unless you're going to like a market that imported foods from around the world. The roots can be massive, up to 80 pounds per root. They're pretty high in starch, have some protein, and they also produce a compound called sapogenin that mimics our hormone cortisone. So just bear that in mind. Now, cassava is more prevalent around the world, and it also was domesticated here in Central America, introduced to Africa by the Portuguese, and became a major food crop because of its high starch content and ease of growth, even more so than in cereals or or like rice and corn. Now, cassava belongs to the Euphorbiaceae family. This family is known to have latex. Its other members of this family include poinsettia, and they oftentimes produce compounds in the latex that can be problematic, so this root has to be cooked. It's easy to propagate by cutting and grows in dry and arid conditions. And there's very little insect or pest that this plant struggles with. So it can tolerate long periods of drought, which is really very good for many places around the world that have these conditions. So next to rice and corn, it's the third most important source of carbohydrates. The biggest issue is that it is a major staple in the diet. And for people that rely on this as a nutrient source for starch and carbohydrate, they're actually at risk for developing kwashiorkor, which is a protein deficiency. It can be reversed over time, but it is a huge issue if you develop this. Now, the root itself has this rough exterior skin that has to be removed because it contains cyanogenic glycosides that, when consumed, produce cyanide, which in high levels is toxic and also problematic for the central nervous system. And only cooking and removing that exterior skin can remove that risk. So traditionally, people would use this woven basket called the tapete, and it kind of squinches in and then kind of releases, and it allows you to stretch it and then sort of twist it and slough off that outer exterior and also remove some of the juice and grate the pulp. And this helps to remove those glycosides that can be so problematic. Typically, there needs to be a drying, a soaking, a boiling, or grating or fermenting process, or a combination of these to remove these compounds. but it's really a popular dish around the world. You can see that the roots can be quite large and they fit in these baskets. There are different types of cassava, and not only is it eaten in some of these ways, but it can be deep fried and kind of used as a replacement to white potato. Um, and it can be used to make tapioca or a West African dish called fufu from the starchy cassava flour. It's also what produces the pearls inside boba, as well as tapioca for the pudding. Other uses of cassava include animal feed used for textiles and pharmaceuticals, and the starch that is quite gelatinous. Another root crop that you may be more familiar with is carrot, native to Europe, as well as Southwestern Asia. It has 2 points of origin. Originally, this root crop was white, but the genetic mutation over time, we saw these colors represented in the roots, and they just happen to be nutritionally beneficial. China produces about half of all of the world's carrots, followed by European countries, as well as Russia and the United States. Brassica rapa or turnip is a taproot that is often confused with parsnip or rutabaga, but it's round. It has this purple-white bicolor. They're fairly small. They originated out of the Middle East, and they are well adapted to that growing climate, which here in the United States we have as well. And interestingly, there's a lot of folklore about them being carved as the first jack-o'-lantern before pumpkins replaced their use. And actually, you can eat the tops of the greens, and you'll find that's also true with beet greens, which were thought to originate out of the Mediterranean. Um, this root can vary in color from white to red to orange to purple, and has a sweeter flavor, and also is prized because it produces bitumen, which is a food coloring. And if you ever cut up beets, you know that they will stay in your hands. They're not related to sugar beet, but sugar beet is one that doesn't really have any color to it, but is known for being high in sugar. And so if you see packaging that doesn't say it has sugar, it comes from sugar cane, it's probably from sugar beet. We'll talk more about that, but it's pretty interesting. Now, rutabaga is another purple and white underground starchy root. It's a cross between a cabbage and a turnip, and we typically see that in a puree or roasted. Now, the last crop that I want to focus on is a tropical crop, and we're going to talk more about fruit next week, but this one is banana. And banana originally had seeds in it. Now it's a sterile triploid, and so it doesn't produce seeds at all. And it's asexually propagated. Actually, we only propagate one variety, Cavendish, pretty much predominates the market worldwide. It was traded in Africa and made its way to the New World via the Portuguese and the Spanish, but it was established quite early. It belongs to the Musaceae family, and the plant itself is actually not a tree. A lot of people think that it is. It's a monocot, and it's actually propagated by corm, which we've already talked about. The leaves themselves can also be used for cooking purposes, and it's really ubiquitous around the world in tropical locations. Now, the plant can be reproduced by vegetative propagation, and the plant will produce hands of bananas after about 12 months. The fruit itself is sweet and starchy. We call it like a dessert banana. It's a true fruit, which we'll talk about that botanically and what that means. There's also a relative of this group called the plantain, which is starchy, larger in size, and must be cooked in some way before it can be eaten, which is different than the sweet banana that we're accustomed to. Bananas are quite at risk, particularly because we have really only relied on one variety for a long period of time. And there's a disease called Panama disease or the tropical race 4, which is really decimating our bananas around the world. Banana fruits are the #1 fruit in the world, most commonly consumed, and it's greatly at risk due to this fungi that is wiping them out. One of the best defenses we have is genetic engineering. And so there are genetically engineered bananas, but they haven't quite broken into the market yet. I'll talk more about genetic engineering, but I just want you to be aware that that's an issue today.